It's Thursday, and as you know, on Thursdays I fold laundry and talk to you. Some of you, if you happen to be watching this live and it's not Thursday where you are, then we're probably in different time zones. You'll still be able to hear the things that I say, and they'll all make sense. I always think it's so funny when someone's having a different day than I am. You know, it's someone that I know and someone that I've broken bread with before. I don't think that I've broken bread with you before, but I don't know who you are. The connections of strangers has always been one of my favorite things to think about and enjoy and appreciate. I have a dream, and I'm going to share it with you. It's from early January of 2024. And in this dream, I was visiting my parents, and I walked into their house, and the floor in their house, I think that's just a rag. I'm going to put it over that pile. The floor in their house was very springy. It actually looked different than the floor that's actually in their house. It also reminded me of the floor that I had in a house that I owned for 10 years, which is the longest that I've ever lived in any house. So I think that is a floor that we replaced when I lived in that house. And by we replaced, I mean we hired someone to put the floor down in that space. In the dream, it was particularly springy, and as soon as I recognized the spring, I started bouncing up and down on it, and it was very pleasurable to do so. So I did it more in a more exaggerated way, and while I was doing it, I knew that it was probably not a good thing to do. It was probably the wrong thing to do, to be bouncing up and down on the floor. But I also felt like the pleasure of the situation outweighed and outpaced the problem. So I kept on doing it, and I did, kind of harder and harder, as many of us do when we find pleasurable things, regardless of their safety or wisdom. And the floor broke beneath my bouncing, and I immediately fell through the floor into a chamber that we've called the secret room. We sort of had secret rooms in every house that we lived in, and that was mostly because we were so compelled by stories of resistance families who hid Jews during the Holocaust. And we were, watching the mini-series called The Holocaust was the first real kind of adult television that I ever encountered. I lived in a family where we did not watch television very much at all. And I can't have been more than 10 or 11 years old when it aired. And it was a heavy thing to watch. And I remember that all the other siblings had to go to bed, but because I was, of an age of conscience, I don't know, maybe they also recognized that I really liked stories and that it would be meaningful to me. And they watched it with me, but we would have talks beforehand, talking about what was happening, why it was happening. Anyway, so we had this. It was really kind of a larger than normal crawl space. It was just concrete and concrete bricks, but we had decided, because the only way to get through it was through a little square trapdoor in the back of the closet, which was the best thing of all, right? And in many of our houses, we had trapdoors in various places. My parents actually built a house, and when they built the house, they intentionally put a trapdoor between the closets of my room and my brother's rooms so we could crawl back and forth between them. My brothers are in this dream, but as you know, I don't use anyone's names. when I am having these episodes, and so I have actually I wrestled with a little bit, and I'm going to give them names uh, that will be their names anytime that I talk about them here. I have two brothers named Mervyn and Titus, and a sister named Lenore. And Mervyn and Titus and Lenore is sort of only in it a little bit, but they'll be in this story a little bit later. So there I was in the secret room, and I looked up at the what was the floor in the kitchen, the ceiling in this room, and I was sort of astonished at the poor workmanship. The whole entire floor was like a patchwork of splinters and kindling and scraps of wood. I was like, how in the world did this last as long as it did? How did this pass any inspection code from any building? I couldn't believe it. But I mean, the damage was significant. Like, these splinters were everywhere. It was just astonishing. My dad happened to come into the room, and he had a very disappointed look on his face, and he said, "You know that you're going to have to be responsible for all this." And I solemnly agreed that I would have to be responsible for all of it. And so I started to clean up the mess that I had made, all the splintered wood and the little bits of wood that were fragments of wood that were on the floor, and put them into a bucket. And as I was doing so, I suddenly realized these would be fantastic, and we should keep them with that pile of laundry. These would be fantastic for the game of espionage that my father, my two brothers, whose names are Mervyn and Titus, and my sister was playing, and also two of the cousins from the next generation. One's named Icha, and the other is Naomi. Mervyn, did I say Melvin before? It's definitely Mervyn. Mervyn, Titus, Lenore, Icha, Naomi. I guess only Titus is the one who's going to figure mostly into the stream. But the way that this game worked that we've been playing for a long time, called Espionage, is that you had a sword of some kind, and that's what I thought would be really great, to use these splintered pieces of wood for your sword. And you had to carry your sword very inconspicuously, in a way that would make your opponents think that you had forgotten that we were playing the game. Because the only time you were allowed to stab one of your opponents, and you weren't stabbing them to actually hurt them, just in order to, hey, now we're winning. Oh, I just forgot to do my little trick with the tray, because I came to an actual t-shirt. So here we go. And you'd stab them. That would mean they were dead for 5 whole minutes. And during that 5 minutes, if other members of your team were able to stab the rest of the members of their team, then you won the game. But after 5 minutes, they were just resurrected, and there was no problem. So I just thought, well, these would be fantastic if we could actually use these in our war. And it was just about that, not our war, our game called Espionage. The other thing is that no one could ever know that we were playing Espionage. Like, you had to be so discreet that if someone else was in the room who wasn't a part of the game, you couldn't stab anyone. And if 2 people from the other team or 2 people from your team were in the room, and a third person, but that's an ideal time. But you hoped that you would never be stuck in a room with 2 of the other people, and none of the people were not playing. So, for instance, my mom was not part of the game. There are many cousins, many in-laws who are not a part of the game. So for all of them, they actually created a safe zone for you. You didn't have to worry about it when they were in the room with you. And just about that time, I was also getting ready to go to the wedding. We were all getting ready to go to the wedding. I heard my 2 brothers, Mervyn and Titus, walking, kind of creeping around together. And my mother had been in the room next door recently, but I knew that she wasn't there now. And I heard them saying that they thought that I was probably in the room. Well, I knew that this was a very bad situation because obviously there's two of them, there's one of me, and they could go on a rampage. So in my family, we did have these competitions like this, but the teams were a little bit different because in our teams, Mervyn and I were always on the same team, and it was the two of us against my father, my sister Lenore, and my brother Titus. And that was kind of a little bit unfair, but myself and Mervyn were the older two siblings, and they were the younger two, so it was kind of balanced out. Now the way the teams were, it was my dad, Mervyn, and Titus were all on one team, and I was on the more people team with my sister Lenore and my two nieces, Icha and Naomi. So I immediately hid in a laundry closet, and I was working to get the door closed, but it was jammed. And the only place that I could be that I thought would maybe keep me safe is to be on the very top shelf. You know, like over the washer and dryer, there were two shelves where all the different things were stored. I climbed up onto the top shelf, and I couldn't get the door closed, but I just stayed completely silent so that I wouldn't be caught, so that I wouldn't be stabbed. And just at the moment that my brother Titus was just about to leave from kind of looking in the closet, all of a sudden, like something on the shelf like fell, and he sort of grandiosely was like, "Well, I guess this is a bad time for you, isn't it?" And I was like, "It's only me and you right now, so if I am able to stab you at the same time that you stab me, we'll both be dead for 5 minutes, and that will be a waste of both of our time because we have to leave for the wedding right now. This is not a good time for you, even though you feel really triumphant right now." He kind of agreed, so we left for the wedding, and we had to board buses. They were Greyhound buses, and they were absolutely packed. Like there were no seats in the buses. Everyone was standing, and we were just smushed together. And I actually kind of made a joking reference to the Holocaust train cars to one of the other guests. Obviously, we didn't have any of the dread, and I feel like my joke was in very poor taste. And I know that the person who I made it to didn't approve of it or think very highly of me as a result of me doing it. It was a stranger. But I mean, that was my only point of reference, I think, for being so stuffed into a moving space, a moving transit. But there were 4 different buses, and I happened to be on a bus with no one that I knew. And we traveled through these hills that reminded me a lot of the parts of Kentucky where the horse breeders live, and they have, you know, this rolling lawns for miles and miles with these white split rail fences that just, and you think like, who mows around these fences and who repaints them every year? Because it pretty much looks like they're repainted every year. That's where we were, and we rode forever and ever, and there were all these people standing up. It was inconvenient, and finally they said, "Okay, it's time to take a break." So they pulled into this little camp, and it was an actual camp that I had gone to as a child, but just for a day camp. And the other reason we went to this campground was for church softball games and potlucks. Do you remember that there was once, maybe many times, but I remember specifically once that there was a concert given by this band that I thought was the best band ever, and I wish I could tell you what their name was, but that's one of the rules here. We don't talk about the names. That's neither here nor there for the dream either. So I was like, well, maybe once I get off the bus, I can find some friends, find some family, and just enjoy the rest of the ride together with them. But as soon as I got off the bus, like all the other buses had already debarked. We were the last one to debark, and people were in these long lines, these switchback lines, like a roller coaster at Cedar Point. And so you couldn't get out of line because apparently you had to be resorted before you could board the buses. I didn't know if that meant that maybe I would just be randomly assigned to a new bus where I knew someone. But right for now, at least, during the whole time, I mean, I think we were standing there for like 2 hours waiting to be sorted and re-embark on the buses. And sure enough, when our bus finally was ready to be boarded, it was all the same people that had been on the first bus. But by this time, because we've been waiting in line for so long, a kind of camaraderie had developed amongst us. And so I was feeling a little bit better about the situation. And one of the kind of new friends that I had made was pretty famous. Like the rest of us, like, had come to know that they were like the most famous person on the buses and maybe at the wedding. And he said, kind of like with a great theatricality as we were boarding the bus, "I'm so glad that I'm at least on a bus with vampire players." And vampire players, he went on to say, and he was right. I mean, I didn't remember that we had been talking about the fact that we were vampire players, and I was a vampire player in the dream. He said, "I just think that they're some of the most creative and intelligent people to be around, and I couldn't be happier to be riding this bus with them." And that's the end of my dream. I never made it to the wedding. There's, I think I may have talked about this before in another episode. One of my favorite movies, in fact, until yesterday, it was my favorite movie, which is called The Petite Charms of the Bourgeoisie. Kind of one of the main things that happens in the plot is that there are these middle-aged diplomats and doctors, society folk, the bourgeoisie, and they are all trying to just have dinner and have wine. They're trying to like have a dinner party, but they keep getting thwarted by various things. Like, for instance, a restaurant is closed because of a funeral. And what's another thing that happens? A priest mysteriously appears sort of out of nowhere, and he makes some trouble. And then there's a coup in the country, and the military comes to the house, and they're very polite. They want to join them at the table, but now that no one wants to eat because it's a coup. And the whole movie, we're just waiting for them to sit down and have a meal together. And that's not all that happens in the movie, but it is a lot of what happens in the movie. And that's a little bit how my dream went. I'll just go ahead and promote. Remember, I just said that movie was my official favorite movie until yesterday. I went to the Iranian Film Festival. It was actually the opening night of the Iranian Film Festival last night, and watched a film called Universal Language by a filmmaker named Matthew Rankin. Matthew Rankin was not on my radar. I've since found out that he's made some other movies that I can't wait to watch. But this film is just an absolute delight. I could see some clear references to Kiarostami's work, and to Truffaut's work, and to Wes Anderson, and to Roy Anderson. But it was not derivative, like there were these really great ways in which he paid homage to these filmmakers. It's just such a sweet, love-filled, sorrow-soaked love song, love ballad, poetry, um, to a kind of a mythical city, a mythical version of Winnipeg. I have never been to Winnipeg, but I have ancestors who settled there as people were making their way west across the continent in both Canada and the United States. And interestingly, my great grandmother was betrothed to a man who set off for Alberta to go farm there, and she was supposed to marry him, and she was waiting for him to call for her to come out there. And all of a sudden, the word came back that he had gotten a girl pregnant, and it was already married to her. And her heart was broken, and things were very terrible for her for a long time. And then she met the man that she married, who was my great grandfather. And the story is really, it never sort of starts there. It always was told by my grandmother, who heard all these things unfold about her mother as she was listening through the register. And it was really her favorite story to tell, and her favorite maybe thing that happened to her. And I do think that, like when we find out things that are just beyond the limit of our imagination, they do change us. And that's one of the reasons why I love dreams, and I love sharing them here. Oh, it looks like this is maybe one of the longest episodes. I didn't even get half of my laundry done, but it was lovely to have you here. Remember, this particular series is one that everyone is welcome to participate in. If you just want to have an episode on your channel, please do. Please do let me know. Please tell me in the comments so that I can watch and enjoy the conversation and the dreams. Thanks for being a part of my Thursday evening.